A few weeks ago, I brought you the unboxing and the assembly of my new kinetic log splitter. Now, I finally got around to doing a little bit of firewood. I've spent a few hours at it, and I thought I would show you what I'm doing and how it's working from the process of actually cutting these logs through to splitting them. I'll try and do it without any commentary, and after you see the action, we'll have a chat about it then. Yes, I know what you're thinking. That firewood is pretty much half rotten already. You could split it with the back of an axe, and that's pretty true. Most of the trees that I use are windfalls, either out of the forest, and some have been on the ground for a number of years. Some of them are a lot more rotten than others. Now, that was more rotten than I expected it to be. So let's go back and get a log that promises to be a little bit more of a problem, a bit tougher and a little bit harder to split, and see how it goes with that. Due to a technical error, I lost sound on this section, so I will relent and give you some commentary. Now, this log, yes, is quite a bit tougher. As you can see, it's a lot slower to chainsaw. I did leave the bark on trying to hurry things, but that actually slows you down in the long run because it's a lot tougher to get through with the chain, and you're inclined to blunt it as you go because the bark on these stringy bark trees is really, really tough. And as you can see from this log, it has a number of limbs coming off it. It also has a major division in it where a large limb came off. So here with this first round that I'm going to split, there is a limb section. Now this section's got some nice straight grain in and easy splitting, but you can see that this timber is a lot greener than the first lot that I was splitting. While that first lot was fairly rotten, there's still some quite good firewood in it, and it will burn quite well, being largely quite dry. You can notice there some of the fibres, that anything that's crossed is very tough and hard to pull apart. Now with approaching these knots, it's taking them really well, and basically these knots would take several blows to get through with a hand splitter, a blockbuster. But with this, just a single blow is going through them and straight through the knot too, opening it up quite effectively. Occasionally you can double stack them, but if they're too high, it causes a bit of a problem like I had there. But sometimes double stacking them actually speeds up the process. Now you'll notice that I cut my timber fairly short. I do that because the wood heater I have only takes a fairly short log. They're generally in the region of 11 inches, or that's about 275 in the metric terminology. Now this one is where the tree divides off into a major second branch, a large branch, and it's got quite a opening in the middle of the log there, but it's all splitting really nicely. I don't know how this splitter would go with the timber if it was longer. I haven't tried. I don't really intend to, because I have no use for longer timber than this. But certainly having it shorter does always make it easier to split. Most of the timber I have is fairly easy to split. Look, there are a lot tougher timbers in the Australian forest than we have. The stringy bark, which is the main thing here, is generally fairly straight. It's not twisted trees, and that gives a nice straight grain. It's only limbs really that are an issue. But this is all going through really easily. Now, I have made one modification. Oh, look at this one. It's got a double branch. It's further up. Should be fairly tight in those areas. I made one modification on this splitter, and that's the actual blade. When it came, it had probably around a 2mm flat face on it, so not sharp at all. I sharpened it off, and that means it actually cuts through quite easier. Now this is jammed, and pulling the lever back will stop it pushing, but sometimes a bump on the rack is needed to make it retract. The second blow has pushed it through, but it's still quite a big round and pretty hard to handle on the smaller blade. So yes, I sharpened it up, and that makes it quite a bit more dangerous to have your hands around. You need to be quite careful because even just bumping it with your hand, even though it's not sharp like an axe, could still hurt. I'm wearing cut resistant gloves, which I think is fairly essential when it is a sharp edge rather than a blunt one. But having it sharp means a lot less resistance in coming in. This one's really tight and doesn't want to give up. You can see how stringy some of the fibres are. It's going to be good firewood when it dries out. Now, to preempt a few questions that people might ask, one is, why don't I use a grapple or the 4-in-1 bucket instead of the forks? Well, a grapple was not an option in terms of being able to purchase one. They don't make them for the size or the setup of the loader that I have, and I would have to have it custom made or make it myself. It would be better and easier, I'm sure, than the forks. The 4-in-1 bucket that I have, being only a smaller bucket, really doesn't hold the logs that well. It sometimes will, but can be a little precarious when it comes to some of the larger logs. So I prefer to use the forks, and that also means that I can actually come in and use this modified pallet to move the rounds about and lift them up so that I don't have to bend over. I had considered using a carryall to move these, but it would have meant that I would need to drag the rounds up because it tends to slope up rather than down. And also I tend to use the slasher on the back rather than anything else as basically a ballast when moving the logs. So doing it this way was quite a good idea, I think. As you can see in this round, there is a few limbs and it's breaking that up really nicely. No problems really at all. So far, all in all, I'm really quite happy with it and find it's working quite well. It does require some regular lubrication and use of the oil can. It certainly is making firewood a lot simpler and a lot easier than previous years. But I've still got quite a bit more firewood here to do, so I'm going to be busy with it for a few days yet. However, the garden is demanding my return as it's rather overgrown this time of the year and needs my attention to get it ready for winter. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll be back with another one soon.